just make sure I'm there before you. This is just informal, right? Informal lecture, and I really, the pleasure, great pleasure to have, with distinguished professor and globally well known. He's very interesting, especially, the cross-cultural or cross-national studies. Professor Villa is now a professor in the Indian University, School of Journalism, and where actually I graduated. I got the PhD from Indian University. And then one of the names you know, the Professor David Weaver is actually agenda setting. We were students actually, Professor Weaver. And then he was, before he joining the IU, Indiana University, he was a professor in the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. And also he was a professor in Singapore and Hong Kong. His studying actually focused on priming, as I mentioned last week. He was one of the originators, actually, really interested in that idea of priming. And also it's part of our study, part of our class, mini effect theories. It's great to see, it's great to have the lecture from, informal lecture from the Professor Villa about the priming, and we're gonna, listen. He's a recent study about mini effects. Okay? Okay, now I introduce Professor Villas.
Do I need this?
Okay. Good to, okay, just right here.
Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me. I didn't know about this until recently. He just kind of told me that I should come and talk to you about priming. So it's a pleasure to be here. I'm a Fulbright scholar at Yonsei University, which apparently is the big rival here, right? Yeah. And I heard you won. 4 out of 5 out of the contests you won, so they're going to be very depressed when I talk to them tomorrow. But it's great to be here. I love to be in Korea. As he said, I've taught in Hong Kong and Singapore. Asia is my second home. I spent a lot of time in Asia. I do a lot of research here, so that's why I'm here right now. Most of my research is on Asia today. I think most of the exciting stuff is happening here. So it's perfect to be here, in Korea especially, where everything is so wired and exciting. I'm looking at the election here in Korea coming up, and I'm looking at the US election at the same time, so that's what I'm doing at Yonsei right now. And I happen to be here today because we were talking about research, so here I am. Priming is one of my interests. I have worked on this, not recently, but I've worked on this before. It's an exciting theory, and I think it's really undervalued because not many people really work on this theory right now. Most of the attention is on framing. You probably have talked about framing, right? Everybody talks about framing. Everybody is doing research on framing. I think that there's a lot of potential in priming research, media priming research. It's undervalued, it's under-researched. So I want to introduce a little about this today. You have a flipper? No, right? Doesn't matter. I just press the button here. Okay. Just to kind of give you an idea of what the theory is all about here. It's all about memory. It's all about how you think about things and how you organize thoughts in your mind. And of course, the model for that is a network. It's kind of, the argument is that your thoughts, your ideas, your memories are all organized as a network in your mind. Right? Little nodes that are connected here. You think of, Yonsei University is connected to Korea University. You think of, the games, right? The competition. That leads you to think about the students, maybe the girl you met there, right? All these things are connected in your mind as a network, right? They are connected and associated in this way. Information comes into your brain, right? Behavior comes out. You base your actions, your thoughts, on whatever is organized here in your brain. That's kind of the general idea of how people think about things, right? With this kind of network of associations. Various stages of how you go through every time you encounter something new, right? When you come across new information, like today, right? There's this encoding stage, there's a storage stage, there's a retrieval, and there's a judgment that follows from this. So today, for example, here, you're sitting here, you're encoding right now, right? Some of you write it down. It's a form of encoding. Hopefully you remember it one day. Other people just sit there, right? You're encoding while you're listening, right? Depends, right? It matters how you encode because it will actually result in different types of storage. Some people rely on the paper. Other people store it right away in their brain, right? You try to memorize things. So it depends a little bit on how you store things and how you organize things. Then, of course, the question is, can you retrieve it later on, right? When you walk out the door today, will you remember any of this? Maybe, maybe not, right? Depending on how you stored it. If you stored it well, right, you might remember it maybe an hour later, 2 days later, a year later, who knows, right? You might not remember anything you saw today. You might just remember me, or maybe not, right? Depends on what you store and what you can retrieve from your memory. And that also influences judgments later, right? Whatever you learn today will influence how you judge other things today, right? If you meet a new person in life, if you meet, let's say, a North Korean, right? It might change your thinking about North Koreans enormously because, well, they influence how you think of all the other North Koreans, right? Just as an example. So all these things matter here. Let me walk you briefly through these stages here. Oh, I forgot to mention. If there's a distortion, or a kind of disturbance in any of these stages, right? Encoding, storage, retrieval, it will change everything, right? If you get distracted, if you're looking at your iPad or your computer, right? In this stage here, you get distracted, you might not store things as well. That's why I usually don't allow computers in my classes. What do people do on computers? Yes, they take notes. But what else do they do? You know what I'm talking about, right? You look at the internet, you look at your email, and then the person behind you is looking at your computer, right? And they get also distracted. It's really a problem. I've seen it, and people are really, really not learning that much. So there's disturbance here in this stage, right? The encoding and storage. You get totally distracted. It's one of the lessons that I've learned. Okay, so that's kind of an important point here, right? You do not want to be distracted if you really want to store it well and be able to retrieve it later at that stage. Okay, storage first, right? You're storing information. It's like a little computer hard disk, right? Well, they don't look that anymore, the new ones. You're trying to store it, you organize it. And, well, let me ask you, why do you write things down? I mean, many of you I see is writing things down. Why do you do this? Will you ever look at the notes again?
Hey, come on, guys.
Okay, yes you do. Yes you do. But what else does it help you with? Who said what? Yeah?
Just to remember.
It's a tool, right? It's a way of storing it differently. Because when you write it down, what happens?
You see it, you write it in your head.
Yeah, it's
It just helps you remember things.
You're physically putting it down on paper. You're thinking about it, right? You're trying to think about what is the sentence that I'm going to write down on paper, right? You're more actively involved than just sitting there. Okay, I could be outside eating something now, right? It's a practice students have learned, and you're good at this now, right? You're students. You have been students for a while. You know how to do these things now. Other people who are not trained like this, they're not as good, right? They're outside people who have never done anything like this. They're not as good as storing information, organizing information in your mind as people out there, right? So you already have better practice. You already are better at these things. So you're probably more likely to process information more efficiently than other people, right? You might also store information in terms of a schema, right? You organize it not only as isolated ideas, but as schemas, like a network. For example, you have heard that I'm from IU, Indiana University. What does that relate to in your mind? Associations. So you know I'm from the US, so therefore I am American, but I'm not. I'm German, actually. But, you know, that's how you think, right? IU, American, he is probably who knows what, right? You organize things in this kind of network of ideas, right? You don't only remember one thing. You remember, okay, he's from America, he's IU, he has studied with him, right? So there's a connection there. So you're storing things in a memory in a kind of a schema. You have these schemas for a lot of different things. So let me see if my next slide actually talks about this. Yes, right? You have a schema about yourself, right? Who are you? You are, most of you, Koreans, I think, right? What else? Students. It's a whole schema, the way you behave, right? You sit here, you write things down. You're the student, you're not the professor, right? That's a whole schema. You behave accordingly, right? So you have a whole concept of yourself, right? I see some foreign students too. There's one there. You too? From Sweden and Lebanon, right? Different self-concepts, right? You think of yourself differently than the other people, clearly, right? Because of a different country, different culture. Other individuals, who are those Swedish people, right? You might look, not blonde, something wrong there, right? Wrong schema. Groups, stereotypes, right? The Germans are like that, the Koreans are like this, the Americans are like that, right? You think of whole groups of people, it's schemas, right? If you know this person's American, what do you do? It helps you actually to approach people. If you think this person, because he's wearing a baseball cap and is chewing gum, when you approach the person, what do? You know already this person's American, so what do? You don't speak to them in Spanish, right? You're trying to speak English to them, right? You know what kind of country they represent. You're probably not going to say Obama is really sucks, right? Things like that. And then events too, right? You approach events with this kind of the election is a good example. We know what to expect, right? We have a whole schema of, okay, we're supposed to vote, we're supposed to make up our minds about the candidates, right? We already know, right? It helps you to approach the event. All right, so these are all very useful kind of things in daily life. I'll give you one example here. Well, maybe that's not the best for Koreans. That's an American kind of schema, right? Guns in people's minds. Guns, Americans love guns. They kill people, you can shoot with them, right? There's blood involved, right? Death. Red Cross is kind of the ambulance sign kind of thing, right? And hit people. And if you think more than that, guns in US, you connect them to politicians, right? Clint Eastwood was recently on television, right? I'm connecting him to guns. You have a whole schema about what a gun means to you, right? So that's kind of the schema of a person who thinks about guns. I
have a question.
Yeah?
Why not ask the same questions? What about the schema in Korea?
Yeah, I was just going to do that.
Instead of just a gun.
What do you think of? The first thing that comes to mind. What do you connect that to? Gun.
I have Olympic gold medal.
Shooting? In the Olympics, right? Yeah, very unique. What else? Military, right? I mean, lots of you guys have been probably to the military already, right? What else? Americans, right? You get the idea. You see a gun, you associate certain things. That's a schema, right? And people hold different ones depending on where they come from. There's another example here. Professor, right? Does a professor look like this? Well, American professors. This is actually was a colleague of mine, actually. It's a real professor. Very famous professor, Entman. Professor Entman. He looks like the stereotypical professor, doesn't he? Kind of the jacket, the tie, really cheap jacket with patches, glasses, right? That's how we think of professors. He's a bit atypical here, but pompous, right? Professor. Books, he reads a lot of he, right? Tends to be he. Not in real life, we know this, but we think of professors as males, right? Often, right? Bearded, glasses, kind of the dominant male person, smart, of course, right? All this doesn't work. Right? That's true. I can attest to that one. These are things that people hold. It's a stereotypical kind of perception, of course, right? Not all professors look like this, but that's kind of what we have in mind. Why? Where do you get these images? University, yes, but media too, right? The image of a college professor. It's kind of the middle-aged guy who looks like this, right? But that's kind of a stereotype, of course, that we get from the media quite a bit. So why do we form these schemas, these kind of stereotypical perceptions of things? Why do we do this?
To organize the knowledge for efficiency.
Organize your knowledge? That might... about an election, about, let's think politicians, right? If you think of a conservative politician, you already know what they stand for, right? Politically. You don't have to think much, right? Makes it easier. Just like my example for if you see an American on the street, you approach them, it makes it much, much easier if you know what they might stand for, right? It helps you to kind of process information. Something new you encounter in life. If you have these schemas, you know how to act. You know how to remember certain things, right? And it speeds up the judgment. You see a person on the street, he or she looks dangerous. You go on the other side of the street. Why? Because you have the schema of what a dangerous person looks like, right? How does a dangerous person look like? Okay. I know lots of people with tattoos who are totally harmless. But of course, you're right? You think gangster, you think mafia, you think Yakuza, yeah?
Do you have a tattoo?
What?
Do you have a tattoo?
No, I don't, but I know a lot of people who have, but they're totally harmless. What else? Dangerous person. Dark sunglasses? Okay. I know lots of people with dark. Okay. She has this image of, interesting. Certain professions? You said something? Professor? Dangerous? Forgetting it with bad grade, come on, yes. But that's about it. But you get the idea, right? So you know when you approach in the dark alley, if the guy, this guy, come on. If you meet him in a dark alley, would you be afraid? No. Right? Unless you're a 12-year-old girl, maybe, yes. But not really, right? So you get the idea. It helps you to judge people, to make judgments in certain situations, right? It's enormously helpful to have these memories, these schemas in your mind already, right? So these are the advantages that I just talked. What are the disadvantages? I mean, they help usually to make judgments. But what could be a disadvantage? Misjudgments, right? Who said who was Swedish? You were, right? So she doesn't look Swedish to me. Right? I have the stereotype of Swedish people in my mind. What is it like? Help me. Tall, blonde, yeah. But what do we also associate tall blondes with? Yes, right? So that you could make really big mistakes, right? Assuming these things, right? So not all Swedish people are dumb, right? Especially the ones who are blonde. So you can make big misjudgments, right? So there's some disadvantages, right? If you use schemas in your life, you approach people, you think in a certain way, right? Sometimes they're not. Quite often they're not, right? So it could help, but it could also make you really misjudge people, right? Okay. Heuristics. This is the whole reason why we use schemas, because basically what we are is we're lazy. And you all know this, right? We're all lazy. Me included, Tim included, well, not him. We are all, he has a stressful life. We're all basically lazy people. When it comes to politics, what do? No, let's make it easier. When it comes to class, what do? Readings every day, right? Do we do this? You have strategies, right? Not to do the readings, so to kind of pretend you sit there and,
Oh, that's true.
Yes, but it's just such a natural kind of thing, right? We're all lazy. But when it comes to politics, right, we're extremely lazy. Do you read the news every day? Do you keep up with the news? And you're going to vote, right? In the next election, are you not? Who are you going to vote for? You don't know yet, right? It's a bit early to ask, right? But will you actually sit down every day from now on and read about the candidates? It's Park and Moon, right? Right now? Will you read about these two every day and follow what they stand for? Their policies, their ideas, their intentions? You're not, right? So how are you going to vote? Heuristics, right? You're using a heuristic, you're using a shortcut, a mental shortcut. What could you use? Give me one shortcut to make this election really easy for you. Party, right? That's a shortcut. You're going to vote for the conservatives or the liberals or whatever they are, right? That's a shortcut because you know what they stand for, right? You have a schema in your mind. Conservative politicians are like this, they're going to do that. Liberals are going to do this, right? You know already it's a shortcut. Or, even easier than that, If you're total ignorant, you have never heard of parties, what else could you use?
Popularity.
Well, part, for example, is a... You use gender, right? You simply vote for the woman because you like her or not, depending on whether you think of her father, right? Right, so you use gender. Or even more basic, you watch the debates and then what? You listen to all the arguments that the two politicians made. They battle it out, right? But in the end, what do you remember?
Jokes.
Who made the better jokes, right? That would be a sad, sad way to vote, right? Yes. Or, even more basic than that, what do people pay attention to in politics? Appearance, right? Yeah, the image, right? The plain image. Did she look nervous? Did she look nice? Was she pretty? Was he looking like a leader? You know, all these stereotypes that we associate, all these images that we conjure up, that might help us actually to vote, right? It's a heuristic. It's not a good one, right? The good-looking politician. Look at Mitt Romney. He looks like Ken from Barbie and Ken, right? Doesn't he? He looks perfect. He looks too perfect almost, right? It's almost scary. But so does Obama. He's a pretty good-looking guy, right? So hey, image makes difference, right? Okay, so yeah, we're basically all little lazy people with a small brain, right? We don't want to spend time on things. We have other things to do, right? We're looking for the shortcuts, like voting for a politician based on how he or she looks like, right? Because these judgments are hard. You don't want to spend time reading about politics every day. It's tiring, right? If you look at the US election right now, there's a story every day or two, right, about the candidates. A lot of work. So we use these shortcuts to kind of make an easy decision, right? But they create error. If you vote for the pretty guy, not good, right? Who is this? Just make my point here again. I just pulled him off the internet, but what does he look like? I don't know who this poor guy is. But how does he look like? I hope not. Doesn't matter. I have no good answer anyway. Harry Potter. Okay, interesting. Would you trust this guy? Would you? Right? I mean, this might be a perfectly nice guy, but he looks a bit shifty, right? Yeah, I wouldn't spend time with him alone. You know, if you're a 12-year-old girl, he looks like a pervert, right? So maybe he's not, right? Or is he a rapist? Simply because of the way he looks, right? We use these shortcuts to protect ourselves, right? In this case, if you're female especially, you might want to stay away from this guy, right? It's not his fault. He's probably a nice guy, right? But it will influence how you think, right? Especially if you have just seen a movie that kind of primed you towards pervert. In Korea right now, this is big, right? There's a big issue about child molesters, right? So for those people who read these stories and then see this image, well, he's a Westerner. I don't know how child molesters look in Korea, but that's kind of a stereotypical image of a Western molester, right? I think. So if you saw a movie just recently about, or read a story about child molesters, and you see this image, right, you might connect this poor guy with that issue, right? It primed you to think of him as a rapist, right? Okay, encoding stages. We talked about the storage and all this. Encoding is important, right? How do we turn things into mental concepts? That's the question here. The stuff that gets encoded is only what you pay attention to, right? And you all know you're very good at ignoring everything else, right? That you don't want to pay attention to. You can sit here for 2 hours and not hear a word I'm saying, right? It's fairly easy. In politics, do you do this? What do you pay attention to? Everything? Probably not, right? What do you pay attention to in politics? Gossip. Okay, the more interesting stories, right, about the politicians. Yes. Do you pay equal attention to the conservative side and the liberal side? Probably not, right? You pay more attention to the side that you favor, right? So we're very good at ignoring information that we don't like, that we don't agree with, right? We ignore it, we kind of push it away, and it gets never encoded. So if you're a politician, you're trying to appeal to people, it's pretty useless sometimes because they don't listen to you, all right? They don't want to listen. If you're a conservative, they're liberals, there's no way you can reach them, right? So that's one of the problems politicians face, and how you economize, because there's so much information out there, right? You have to ignore certain things. You pay attention to the unusual, the gossip, right? What's interesting, the emotional stuff, right? Who has seen the Clint Eastwood clip? Oh no. I was hoping for more. Nobody? You have to see that. It's Clint Eastwood. You know who he is, right? Big actor, American actor, spoke at the Republican convention about a week ago. Made a speech to an empty chair. Right? It's on the internet. Check it out. It's pretty cool. It created a lot of attention. Nobody watched the actual convention, but then it was put on the internet, and now I think 1 million people have watched the clip. It's him speaking to an empty chair. He basically is addressing Obama, acting as if he's on the stage. It's fantastic. You should see it. Created a lot of attention. But people only paid attention because it was funny. That was the only reason. He was stuttering a little bit, and he was a bit almost senile. But he also made some good points. And he was funny, right? So that's why people paid attention. This is the stuff you remember, right? Your first kiss? Well, some of you, right? You remember this for the rest of your life, probably, right? Or an image like this. You might be too young. Remember, any of you have seen this image? Not one? Oh, God. Wait, do you remember it? Yes. He's old, like me, so we remember it. This is Baghdad statue of Saddam Hussein being pulled down by American soldiers. You remember, any of you? Yes. So these are the images you might remember for the rest of your life because they're emotional, right? They are gripping. They're important images because they were done at the end of the war. Actually, it was staged. Americans staged this. It was not done by Iraqis. This was a staged event for television. Americans basically created this image so you remember it as something Americans did, you know. Very emotional point, of course. We remember it. But I think this is the more intuitive one, right? Dating, the first girlfriend, the first boyfriend. You remember these things. Because they're important, right? Okay, retrieval stage, where you're actually trying to get information out of your brain. That's the hard part, right? As you know. It might be somewhere in there. The better it's organized, the easier you can pull it out, of course, right? So what does it look like? What are the things that you remember most easily? Pictures, images, right? We might remember pictures more easily. Why is that? Well, they tend to be emotional, right? The pictures that you remember tend to be emotional, interesting pictures, right? Like the one I showed you, right? An image of a person, maybe. Yeah, so we tend to remember those. What else?
Food.
Food. I heard that Koreans like to blog about food. Is that true? That's totally new to me. That Twitter is used here mostly for tweeting about food. Okay, so food for some reason. Koreans aren't into food. I understand. What else? Because you eat it, right? There's an emotion attached to it. You remember a certain meal. What else do you remember most?
Usual stuff. Something usual.
Unusual, you mean?
Something unusual.
Yes. The kind of unique things in your life. And what else? More easy in terms of time. What do you remember most? Recent things, right? That's important to remember here when it comes to media priming. The stuff that you did most recently, or tried to remember most recently, is probably at the top of your mind, right? Okay. But priming is all based on memory. Priming assumes that you memorize things first. I can only prime things that exist in your memory. That's a condition of priming, right? I'm assuming that there's a schema in you about Germans. Is that true? Well, you have one. Some of you have one about Swedish people, apparently, right? You know about the blonde thing, right? Which is, of course, not true, right? And the assumption is in your brain already memories exist, right? And I can prime these, I can activate them, right? I can activate certain thoughts in your mind, certain networks or schemas in your mind by giving you certain cues. So if I say Swedish, bingo, blonde, right? Lights up like a Christmas tree in your mind. Let's try another one here. Irish, drinking, right? You know it's already because you've heard it before. It's a stereotype in your mind. If you haven't heard this, I cannot prime you to think of Irish as drunks, right? I cannot do it because you don't know this connection. So the assumption is I can only prime things that already exist in your mind, the memories that you hold, right? Germans? Beer, I always hear that, yes, right? So it's true. But the other one that I always get is, yeah, that's true, right? But I cannot, if you don't know what a Nazi is, I cannot prime you to think of Germans as Nazis, right? It's impossible, right? So basically, priming is all about this. I prime you to think of certain things that you already know, that you already have stored in your mind, right? And I prime you to think of these things, and they will influence judgments of unrelated things, other issues. Okay? So I'll come back to that in a minute here. But the idea really is that what I'm priming is really a memory, something that exists in your mind already, right? So the assumption really is that this memory has to exist. That's the whole idea of priming. I cannot prime things that do not exist in your mind. Okay? Okay. So what are the actual mechanisms involved here? The first one is cognitive association. There are associations between thoughts, ideas, feelings, right? They're all related. What I showed you in the beginning here. It's a network of things. And the network involves images, feelings, emotions, smells, everything, right? You might remember a person and you see the image of the person. You might remember how he or she smelled, how he looked like, what he does, all these things, right? This is like a thing in your memory. It's all connected, right? And I can make you think of that person by giving just a name, and all these memories come up, right? Okay. The other thing is spreading activation. The assumption that if I trigger one of those memories, that this triggering effect will kind of affect other related thoughts, right? So by telling you, okay, think of your mother, what other thoughts come up, right? How does that spread in your mind?
Food.
He's into food. Yeah, but perfect example, right? Why? Because your mother probably cooked for you, right? Right? So, mother, food, what else? Is that all? Don't tell your mother. What else? Not you. Mother?
Money.
Ah, okay, money. What else? Father, of course, right? What else? Warmth.
Nobody does it love, for example.
That's what warmth means, right? But you get the idea, right? By trying to prime you to think about your mother, all these associated thoughts come to mind too, right? Through spreading activation, because they are connected. Food, money, right? I can make you think of these things by triggering one of those nodes. I can also make it the other way around. I tell you money, right? And you think of your mother. Or your father, or whatever it is who gives you money, right? Right, so spread these two things here, right? First of all, that these things are connected, right? That your mind is organized as a network of nodes, of memories, and that I can actually trigger that, and it spreads, right, in your mind. And it seems to work, right? So again, what we said before, right? Information comes in here, I'm priming you to think of one thing. Your mother, food, father. Father, help me. What? That's it? Father? No more? Then this is the father. Nothing? Okay, forget it. You get the idea, right? So there's a whole network here. By triggering one memory, I can make you think of all these related things, right? Very easily. That's the principle of priming. I prime one, right? And I can make it, and this is what I showed you before, right? Two different schemas. No, but I can trigger gun, right? And you will think of Red Cross. right? Or I can trigger gun and you think of exam, right? In this case, I don't know how. Fear, right? That's the trigger effect. I make you think of a gun and you suddenly get afraid of your exam, right? That's the power of priming. It's a pretty powerful effect, actually, right? Especially when it comes to politics. So again, long-term memory, right? That's what I'm talking about here. You have these schemas, these memories in your long-term memory about your mother, right? That she gave you money, that she cooks your food. These are long-term memories, and I can trigger them. I can prime them. Any of these memories I can prime and trigger and make you think about them, right? And if you read or hear this word more often than others, right, then it will be more powerful. If I say mother, mother, mother 10 times, right, you will think of your mother and all related thoughts. So the frequency, and this goes back to media exposure, right? The more often you see a prime cue, the more likely it is that you will actually activate your memories. Okay, give me another example. Okay, look at this picture. Ta 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 ta. All right, it's a woman. What else? He's black. All right. Okay. So, what's the most striking feature? Oh. Okay, but apart from that, if she walks down the street here in Korea, you said black, right? Yeah. Well, she stands out because she's black, right? Easy. This is probably the most kind of, especially in a country like Korea that is pretty much very homogeneous, right? She stands out. So you see her, you think of black, right? You think of African American walking down the street. Okay, great. So that also is, of course, connected, right, to other thoughts in your mind. What that means. African American means, okay, there must be American. There might be Americans, right? What else? African Americans are. Help me.
Music.
Music. Okay, musicians for some reason. You think of black musicians. Okay, what else? Sports, right? I hear that quite a bit, kind of the sports stereotype. Well, these are stereotypes, of course, right? I mean, if you walk down, you're black, you don't have to be a sports person, right? Of course not. But my point would be, okay, now what? If I ask you now, overall, how would you evaluate Barack Obama as president? What's the first criteria you're going to use? I just showed you this picture, right? And to make you think about this. African Americans, you know. And then I show you and ask you this question. How would you evaluate President Obama as president? What is the first thing that you probably use to judge him? The first thing that comes to mind is, whoa, wait a minute, he's black, right? He's the first African American president in the US. Fantastic. Therefore, he has done a great job. I just made you think of Obama as a black president, right? By showing you this picture of this woman, not really related, right? But I'm priming this kind of concept of African American, right? He's black, he's unique, first president of the United States who's black, right? He's great, wonderful, fantastic, right? Rather than make you think of him as a president who has improved healthcare, right? Or who has presided over our recession right now, economy. Not doing so well, right? I make you think of him as black. And that determines how you evaluate him. I primed you to think of him as black. Do most people today think of him as black? Do they? Here in Korea? Is that really relevant anymore? I wonder about this. Is it? You tell me. Do you still think of him as, oh, he's an African American? Special. Not anymore, right? It has kind of faded away, which I think is great, you know, because we don't think of him as a skin color anymore. We think of him as competent or not, as a good president or not. The question whether he's black or not, well, so what? You know, doesn't matter anymore so much. This is a good thing, probably. Okay. Now, going back to this idea of media priming, of course, right? And this is an idea that was developed in the 80s and late 80s, that television can actually prime you to think of certain issues, right? Because they emphasize certain issues. Right now in Korea, the election, what is it all about? What are the candidates talking about? Help me, I just arrived 2 weeks ago, so I'm not quite sure yet. What are they talking about? Child molesters? Probably not, right? What? Nothing? You don't pay attention. Okay, let's say they talk about Park's history, right? The father, and if that becomes an issue, you think of her constantly as the daughter of a dictator, or depending on how you see things, of a former president, right? So that determines the way you look at her, right? You judge her based on that alone, which is probably not good. Or you judge her because she's a woman, right? Koreans are open-minded about this. It's pretty good. A woman becoming president. Hey, in U.S., right? That's even more difficult than electing an African-American president, right? So you think of her as a woman, and therefore, what? Does that determine how you see her? If you think of her as a woman first? How would you judge her as a leader? If you think of her first as a woman, and then, okay, let's think about a leader. Does it determine the way you see her as a politician? Because you have a schema for gender, right? For females. What are females like in Korea? Are they all doctors and lawyers and professors? Or is there still a gender gap? Probably, right? So you think of females as strong leaders? Or, because she's the daughter of the former president, right? She is a female and she's a strong woman, right? She made it, despite the fact that she had probably a lot of things against her. She is a strong woman, right? Maybe that also determines how you see her, versus a man who might have just kind of, made it into this system without much effort. Okay, but again, right, the argument here is that television can prime you because television emphasizes certain characteristics, certain issues of a person, right? Obama being black, Obama being a president who's dealing with a recession, whatever it might be, right? So the question really becomes, again, how do people remember things? And we come back to this, right? What you remember and what you use to judge other people or issues is the stuff that is on top of your mind, at the top of the stack, right? The things that you remember, the things that you did most recently, or the things that have been primed most recently, right? So that's going to be what you use to judge other things. Like I said before, I tell you black, right? I make you think of African Americans, and then I ask you, how do you judge Obama? You're going to use the color of his skin to judge him, because I primed you to do this. It only works if you know that he's black, right? Is he? He's mixed, right? He's half white, half African American, so he's actually mixed. So but he himself sees himself as African American, so I guess that's fine. So my point is, right? You can prime people. You can put memories on top of your mind, right? Stuff you have already stored. I can shift their order, and I can make one memory become dominant. I can activate it. It becomes, it moves from down here all the way to the top of the stack. And that's the one you're going to use to judge other things, right? I'm priming you. I'm activating memories, right? So when you're facing a complex issue, like an election, right? You're using the judgments that come to mind most easily because you're lazy. If you judge a politician, you don't judge them by all your knowledge, right? That you have about him or her. You're using whatever comes to mind at that moment when you vote for him or her. Oh, he's a black president. Vote. Because I just primed you to think of him as black, right? Okay? Clear? Right? So the argument would be that your memory is organized, right? And I can activate memories and then move all the way to the top. And those are the memories that I'm going to use to judge other things, right? Another example. Hitler, for those who have never seen this guy before, right? German Nazi. Okay. So let's assume that we talk about this for half an hour. Hitler actually was not German, Austrian, right? So there's some relief there, but not much. The Austrians always say he's German, and what can we say? And Goethe and Mozart, right? Mozart is of course Austrian. But yeah, Hitler, Nazism, right? We talk about this for half an hour. I'm making it, you all know what a Nazi is, right? All of you. It only works if you know what a Nazi is, right? You see this picture, you see Hitler, you know what they stand for, what they did, the atrocities, right? You need to know this, otherwise I cannot prime you now. Nazis, I say this term 100,000 times, right? And what about Germans? How would you rate them overall? You like them? You hate them? On a scale of 1 to 10, right? What are you going to think of right now when I'm asking you to judge a German? What? Hopefully the Nazi, right? I primed you to think of it. It only works if you already know what a Nazi is, right? I showed you the picture, and then I ask you, what do you think of Germans? Well, you're going to use the Nazism as a judgment, right? Rather than that, right? Germans are beer drinkers, nice guys, or nice women in this case, right? Drinking beer, happy people, right? That would actually create a very positive image of Germans, right? But I just primed you to think of him. That means you're probably going to judge them lower, right? Or real world events, you met me, right? That also might influence your perception right now of Germans, all right? But that's the effect of priming, right? The more you read about Germans as Nazis, the more you see the movies, right? The bad guys are always the Nazis, and the Germans, and with a bad German accent, right? This is the main predictor of how you think about Germans. If you see repeated images and read about them as Nazis. Or the other way, right? If you have met a lot of Germans who drink beer, you think of them this way, right? So priming, right? I activate thoughts in your mind. I relate them, right? You think of Germans rather than as Nazis rather than beer drinkers because I just showed you that picture, right? So that's the effect of priming. You know these two things in your mind. You already know they drink a lot of beer, right? And you know they also have been Nazis, right? And I can activate that memory.
If you show the base of the teacher, what would people think?
Well, of course, if I show this picture first, right? Then you would think of Germans as kind of merry drinkers, right? Like that. We don't actually drink big glasses of beer like that. Only Oktoberfest, right? But yeah, if I showed you that picture first, you would have thought of Germans as beer drinkers and probably evaluate them more positively, right? Am I wrong? Koreans like to drink, I know that. So you kind of feel a sympathy towards Germans as well, right? They like to drink too. They like to party. They're nice people, right? Rather than show you this picture, right? They're all Nazis and, don't want to talk to them. Of course, this is the personal experience also play a role, right? Because you meet them in real life. You just met a Swedish person there, but somebody from Lebanon, right? Was it Lebanon? Okay. Right? So we have totally different perceptions of people from Lebanon and Sweden now, because you met them in person. But you read a lot about people from Lebanon, right? What are they like? Well, you might not have, right? So it's a different thing. But you know about the Swedish people, right? So that's the whole thing about priming. You already have memories, thoughts of Germans in your mind, and I'm going to make you think of one of them, of one of those memories. Either that one or that one. That's the power of media priming, right? Repeated pictures, images, text in the media will tell you what Germans are like. And you use these judgments then to judge Germans overall. That's the whole effect, right? Of priming. Very powerful. There's no escape from that. Really, no escape. You can be educated. You can be. You know that the Germans are not like that, right? You know they're not all. I'm too young for being a Nazi. You know that I cannot be one. Nevertheless, if you know what Nazis are, I showed you this picture. You will think of me as somehow connected to that. There's no escape, all right? You can be as educated as you want to be. Priming is very, very powerful. Give you another effect of spreading activation. You're too young for this, I know, but I tell you. This is Monica Lewinsky. Ever heard of her? She was an intern in the White House, and what was she famous for? What? Bill Clinton, yes, she gave a blowjob to Bill Clinton, right? This is a very famous picture. So that's what she was really, really famous for that, right? And it created a lot of media hubbub. Now, spreading activation. Here's a schema of President Clinton, right? That many Americans at that time held. Liberal, right? He was Democrat. He's a liberal kind of president. He was married to Hillary Clinton, right? He still is, actually. There's the intern, Monica Lewinsky, right? Foreign policy, economy, all these things that a president is responsible for. Americans, apple pie, American, right? You know what Americans are like. And then Commander-in-Chief. He is the boss of the army, of course, right? All this is a schema for President Clinton, right? Back then. So, spreading activation actually looks at how I can show you a picture of Monica and make you think of something totally unrelated, okay? How about that? I show you a picture of Monica Lewinsky. Does it influence your judgment of Hillary Clinton? She's the Secretary of State, right? So, very powerful woman. Would it affect your judgment? Not directly, right? If I show you a picture of Monica, and you cannot directly connect it to Hillary Clinton, of course, right? But what happens is, you think of, I show you a picture of Monica Lewinsky. You think of Bill Clinton. You think of Hillary Clinton. You judge her based on what? What is activated here? What thought? Hillary Clinton is a... What do you think? Right? I mean, I show you this picture of Monica, right? You know, some of you already know who she is. You don't think directly of Hillary, but you think of Clinton first, right? Famous for action in the White House, right? And then you judge her. How would you judge her? That's my question. Relationship, right? You judge her based on the fact that she actually, what? Help me, I mean, I make it up too.
She's responsible?
Responsible in what sense?
Like, she didn't break off the marriage.
Yeah, that's where I'm trying to go. She didn't break off the marriage, right? She stayed with her man, right? Is that good or bad? Depends on how you see it, right? I would have gotten divorced, but she didn't, right? So you judge her based on that, right? She's a woman who stood by her man for good or bad, I don't know. You judge it, right? But that's what you think about, no? You don't think about her as Secretary of State, right? As a very powerful woman who has world politics in her hands, right? You think of her as a housewife, as somebody who somehow stood by him, right? And stayed married with him. You judge her based on that, not on her politics, not on her competence, not on her being really tough, right? She's tough as nails, right? But you think of her at that moment as a woman who actually, why did she do it? I mean, why did she stood by him? You could argue actually. Because she wanted to be more powerful, right? She wanted to become president and well, in that case now, Secretary of State, right? So she calculated. If I get a divorce from Bill Clinton, hey, I'm not going to be a politician for the rest of my life, right? Is that good or bad? In my book, I don't like it, right? She stood by him probably for political reasons. So that makes her, in my book, negative, right? Because I think of her, when I see this picture, as a weak woman, right? Who wants rather to be a politician than get a divorce, right? So you see how an unrelated thing, right? Lewinsky, a picture of Lewinsky can make you think of Hillary Clinton as a politician in very different ways. But only if you know already who she is. For some of you who have not known her, right, it would have not worked. I could not prime you to think of Hillary Clinton as a weak woman, right? But for those who knew, it worked, right? I can prime you to dredge up that memory of Hillary Clinton, of Monica Lewinsky and what she did in the White House, right? So that's how spreading activation works, right? I show you a picture of Monica. You actually end up judging Hillary, right? Because it goes to this, but it could also affect other things, right? It could affect how you think about Americans, right? In general, because Americans are linked here, this way, right? So you show you a picture of Monica Lewinsky, you think of Clinton, and you think of Americans, you think all American women give blowjobs. It's not true, right? Wrong conclusion. Or you think of Commander-in-Chief even, right? Of President Clinton as the Commander-in-Chief of the Army back then, right? So very unrelated thoughts, right? You go from Monica to the economy or apple pie or Americans, right? because they're connected, spreading activation. Right? I prime you to think of Monica, you will judge it to look at all these other things. You will judge Americans maybe, right? Okay, done for that. Any questions? Again, the whole thing is based on memory, right? That's what I want you to remember, to kind of store in your mind. Right? Priming is about memory. I can make you think of certain memories in your mind, and you will connect them to other unrelated things. In other words, I prime you to think of other things. Right? Yeah?
When doesn't priming work? When is it not able to?
It pretty much works all the time. It only does not work when you don't have these memories. That's the only time it doesn't work. If you don't know who Levinsky is, I cannot prime you.
But it's not bulletproof.
It's pretty bulletproof. I'll give you another example. If I talk about my computer crashing today, right? I had a virus, actually. A computer virus that destroyed my computer. It wiped everything out. If the word virus comes up in the context, in an unrelated context later on, what will you think of? Computer virus, right? Not a virus that makes you sick, right? It's a pretty powerful effect because I activate a certain memory in your mind. There's no defense.
What often is just like a moment.
Yes.
But then I go back to maybe my experience or so priming just for a moment.
That's a good point, right? Priming is a short-term effect. It doesn't work for a long period of time. It might work for an hour, it might work for a day, and then it probably disappears. But people argue now in research that if you get repeatedly primed with the same image over and over again, right, these things do not disappear. So Nazism being an example, you see this images of Germans as Nazis. You have seen them too many times. It doesn't go away. It's always there. First thing is, oh, beer. Germans drink beer. Comes up instantly, right? It has been so often primed that it has become kind of a set thing. But yeah, priming is a short-term effect, usually. It doesn't last too long. Any other questions?
I think I have a good image for IU.
You have a good image of IU because, okay, thank you very much. Hopefully you have a better image of Germans. That would be my primary goal, right? How many Germans have you met in your life? Just out of interest. A lot, some, no, none at all? Right? I mean, that personal experience makes a difference. If you ever met a German in person, of course you have a different perception. But if you're relying on media images, then your stereotypes are heavily influenced by that. Right? There's no corrective from personal experience. Any other questions? Yeah?
The technology is constantly developing. And do you think the prime fact is more valuable if the technology develops?
Well, okay, technology, what do you mean by technology develops? More internet?
SNS, social networks.
Okay. Well, the effect is still the same, right? I mean, the message might come from the mass media, or in your case now, social media. Your friends telling you about something they saw, right? It will trigger certain associations in your mind. Doesn't matter where it comes from, right? When the research comes from television here, it could also apply to newspapers. The more often you read about something, the more likely it is to activate memories in your mind, to prime you, right? But the same goes for social networks. The more friends you have who have certain images about Germans or Swedish people, the more likely they're going to activate your ideas about Swedish people. No big difference, actually. The messages might be more diverse, right? I mean, we were just talking about this recently. If you follow the election right now in the mass media, in the Korean mass media, is your image going to be different of the politicians than if you follow it on a social network? What do you think? People, your parents, for example, right? They're probably going to be the newspaper readers, the television watchers, right? Am I wrong? Versus you, who use social media to get news about politics. Who's going to have a different image of the politicians? Both, right? I mean, you're going to differ. Because your parents might see them in the newspapers, you might see them on your social networks and discuss them on your social networks. So your images might actually diverge. But I don't know, we're looking into this right now. But good answers are rare in this field because it's such cutting-edge research, right? We don't know much about the effects of social networking.
Is priming always
Oh, another good question. I forgot to say that. Yes. Priming is not, especially when we talk about media priming, right, is usually not that intentional, actually. Right? Journalists create stories, right? They make you think of certain things, but they don't sit down and say, okay, let's make my viewers think about Clinton as let's make my viewers think about Levinsky. It doesn't work like that, right? Priming is often unintentional. You see something, right? The media portrays certain things in certain ways. There's no intention there, but it happens that it primes you to think of other unrelated thoughts, right? So it's not always, actually rarely intentional. That intentional, when we talk about framing, right? That there's more, you could argue there's more intention there. The media frames certain issues. For example, the war in the Gulf, right? The war in Iraq. What kind of war was that? You remember this. It was a war for or against. What was it? I mean, why did Americans go to war with Iraq? Terrorism. It was a war against terrorism, right? Was it? That was the media story, right? The media framed it that way because the politicians told them to do that, right? It's a war on terrorism. George Bush saying, 9/11, oh my God, we have to do something. Let's go into Iraq, destroy Al-Qaeda, look for weapons of mass destructions, right? Terrorism. There was none of that, right? You remember this. It was a war for oil, right? Did the media frame it that way? No. The dominant frame that came from politicians was, it's a war on terrorism. That was intentional, right? You could argue that the journalists kind of conspired here, or maybe didn't resist enough. Right? That was a frame that was more or less intentional. It was created by politicians. But priming is another effect that is often unintentional, right? You see a picture in a newspaper, you think of something totally unrelated. That's incidental, right? Any other questions? How long is the lecture, actually? Oh, there's another one? There.
You still have 10 minutes.
Okay, good.
Why is it different from agenda setting?
Why is it different from agenda setting? Okay, another good question. That's a tough one, actually. What is agenda setting? Have you talked about agenda setting in this class? Not? Okay, a little bit. Agenda setting is all about the media tell you what the important issues are, right? Of the day. The media right now talks about the child molesters in Korea, right? This is an important issue. The media tell you about that. It tells you about the important issues of the day. It increases your, well, if you see it on the front page, you know it's important, right? The media tell people what the issues, the important issues of the day are. Priming is a bit different because priming, yes, it also tells you about the issues, right? But it looks at the consequence, actually. Agenda setting stops at the fact that, okay, I know that right now child molesters are an important issue in Korea. I know that's agenda setting, right? We all now worry about, why is that? Why do we all worry about this? I'm actually not quite sure. Are there a lot of child molesters in Korea? Or is it just one? Help me. I'm here only 2 weeks. I'm learning. Is there one only or many? Many, and the laws are not adequate, or what is the issue?
It has increased number. Is that increasing number?
Okay, so there's an increase in child molestation cases, okay? So there's something going on, right? So we all know we have to do something, that's an important issue, we have to deal with it, right? The media tell you about this, otherwise how would you know, right? How many child molesters do you know? Probably not many in your life, right? So the media tell people what's important, right? But then it stops right there, right? That's agenda setting. It tells you that's an important issue. But priming looks at consequences of all this, right? Priming, okay, child molester. You know now that child molesters is an important issue. What kind of consequences might that result in? If you see images of child molesters on the newspaper, on television, you know it's an important issue. What might be the consequence? Related thoughts. Could trigger you to think of the election maybe differently, right? You use the issue of child molestation and you judge the next candidate, what he or she is going to do about it, right? What else could you do as a consequence? Related thoughts? What does child molestation relate to in your mind? Most of you probably don't have children, so You don't start to worry about your child, in your case. Does it relate to anything in your mind? Death penalty. Whoa. Okay. So there are some really, yeah. Do we have that in Korea right now? Not.
Yeah, but it's not. You don't actually do the.
It's not implemented.
Yeah.
Okay, I get it. Yeah, so you start thinking about the law, right? Death penalty, actually. And what might that relate to? You think of death penalty and then what? You think of gas chambers and injections, right? And then you think of Americans, right? Who do that, who like to do that, right? So it triggers a whole line of thoughts, right? You think of death penalty, you think of the moral implications of that, all these related things. Agenda setting stops at, okay, it's an important issue. Priming, it triggers a whole related thing, right? Associations in your mind. And they can be totally unrelated to the fact, child molester, the issue. It can be totally unrelated. You might end up thinking about food. How would that work? I don't know. That's a bad example, sorry. Okay, child molestation, law, what else could you think of? How does the chain continue? You get the point, right? You could end up thinking about something totally unrelated. Right? But in politics, the point would be, if the media primed you to think of child molestation as an issue, you might judge the next presidential candidate in terms of their record on crime prevention, for example, right? Rather than the economy, rather than North Korea, the issue of North Korea, right? Unification. You judge Park in terms of her record, in terms of law, right? It primes you to think that that's a real consequence, right? Because it changes your vote, maybe, right? Agenda setting does not worry about this, right? It just tells you what the issue is, and yes, people who read a lot of media will know what the issues are. That's the idea here. What are the important issues of the day? Did that answer your question? Okay, what else? Any other questions? We have 5 minutes, I think. Okay, well, thank you for your time. Appreciate it. It was fun meeting you guys.